Hello and welcome back to Rogue Reviews. Today we do something a bit classic. Today we go back for what many people was the birth of the deck building genre. Today we explore whether you are worthy to establish your dominion. Okay, so this is really an interesting one because for many people they're quite used to this idea of deck building games now. It's become quite a popular thing and there's lots of different variations. We're going to be looking at one ourselves later on in the series. So the idea is that this is a game where you basically have a card deck yourself, and each turn you're basically either playing cards or buying cards to get new cards, to have new cards, to use new cards, to buy new cards, to get new cards. You get the idea. If you've never played a game like this before, it's quite unusual, but when you actually get into it, it's a very, very enjoyable type of game. Now, for people who prefer the more board game, the more strategy, the more miniature game, this is a very different experience. So it might take a couple of plays for you to basically work out whether this is something that you enjoy or not. However, if this does kind of like repetitive rolling strategy work for you, it can be a very, very interesting game. So the idea is there are lots of different versions. Also, Dominion itself has about 1,000 expansions. Today we're just looking at the base game, but to basically try and get into it, find out how it works, and give you a bit of an idea about whether this kind of experience would be good for you. Now, there's different versions options available. We're going to look at the general suggested first game playthrough to see what it's like. Okay? So, let's find out what Dominion is all about. Right, okay, let's see what I mean by actual building the game. Now, what you basically have to lay out is a certain number of cards. Now, you'll be building these cards as you're going along. You have a certain amount of wealth that you have to get. You have silver, you have gold, and you have copper. The gold is worth 3, the silver is worth 2, and the copper is worth 1. Fairly easy so far? Great, wonderful, fantastic. Let's move on. Now, there's certain cards you can basically win to get victory points. You have estates, these are worth 1 point. You have, let's have a look, you have duchies, these are worth 3 points. And you have provinces, these are worth 6 points. Okay? Now, at the end of the game, your basically victory condition will be determined purely by these green cards. So everything else is just kind of a means to get those green cards. Okay? Now, some of them are, of course, easier to get than others. Low point value will be easier to buy. High point value will be harder to buy. So in terms of the purchasing value, you're basically trying to earn enough money on your turn to get victory points. That's essentially the main game-winning element. To basically have an estate to buy, you need to have 2 coins available. To be able to buy a duchy, you need to have 5 coins available. And to be able to buy a province, you need to buy 8. Now, 8 is hard to get for a number of reasons, which we'll get into. There are also other variations here. So, for example, if a different version of the game, you might want to have the gardens put in, but we'll talk about that later. So, how are we going to get these coins? Well, obviously, the amount of money you have in your hand will determine that fairly easily. If you just happen to have a pile of gold, it won't be very, very hard to buy a province now, will it? Well, getting to that gold is the issue. So, you have a number of cards available put out before you. You generally start with 10 different types of cards. Now, each of these will have different values, different effects, and will be easier or harder to pick up respectively. Now, as I said, if you see there's a huge amount of different cards available, plus even more if you buy more expansions of the game. So, this is just the generally suggested base cards that you open with, and I'll go into those in a little bit more detail. Okay, so here are our base cards suggested. You have the moat, this costs 2. You have the workshop, this costs 3. You have the village, also a 3. You have the cellar, 2. Any more 3s? Yes. You have the woodcutter, who is a 3. Getting a little bit more expensive now. You have the militia, who cost you 4. The smithy, who also costs you 4. And the market and the mine, who both cost you 5. So what do? Well, each turn you have a set of cards in your hand. Now you start off, everybody starts off in exactly the same situation with a deck of 7 copper and 3 estates. So why do you start with victory points, you might ask? Well, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. These are effectively dead cards. They can't really do anything for you until the end of the game. So having them in your hand is relatively useless. So everyone starts off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with a hand of 5 cards. And that's your draw deck put to one side. So, for example, on my first turn, oh my goodness, I've got 5 gold. That's brilliant. Okay, hardly ever happens. So, with this, I could basically buy any card on the board. Or I could buy a duchy. Or I could buy a silver, which would cost me 3. I can't afford a gold because that would be 6. I can't afford a province because that will cost me 8. So I am limited, but to be honest, 5 for a starting hand is utterly incredible. Now, let's imagine that I really, really like the idea of buying a market, okay? So I will basically spend my 5, take my market card, and put all of this to one side in my discard pile. So have I done everything? Have I done anything? And what have I achieved? This is getting quite a weird experience. I've not really affected the board much at all. I basically ended my turn, I put everything to one side, and that's the end of my turn. Is that good? Well, yes it is, because now I have the market card to add to my deck of cards, and that's why it's called a deck building game. So next turn, if I had 5 cards last turn, I've got 5 cards left, and obviously you can work out what's in my hand now. This turn, I've got the rather rubbishy hand of 2 money plus 3 estates. So what could I do? Well, I could buy another estate, another victory point, but it adds another dead card to my hand. Possibly not the best choice at this point in the game. So what I might do is I might buy one of the other 2-point value cards and add them instead. So let's imagine I want a cellar. Cellars are useful, I'll talk about these in a second. So then all my cards, and I've got no more cards left. So what do I basically do? I shuffle my deck. Once I've shuffled my deck, I can then put it over here and deal out 5 more cards to myself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, if I'm lucky, the cards that I've started to buy will start popping up in my hand, which will give me a few more options. Now, every turn for a base start, I can basically play an action card, that's one of these grey cards, if I've got one. And I can make one purchase. So if I had, let's say, 5 money, I can't buy a card that's worth 2 and a card that's worth 3. I can only buy one thing, unless I get a card that tells me that I can do something a bit different. Right, let's see what we've got. Okay, an estate, useless. An estate, useless. Copper, good. A market and a cellar. Wonderful, I got both my new cards. This is fantastic. So, this is where it gets interesting. A market lets me draw another card, take another action, make another buy, and gives me another one money to spend. These cards are great, okay? The higher value cards obviously will have a more powerful effect. Now, what the cellar does is the cellar lets me basically swap out any cards that I don't like and replace them, plus it gives me another action, which means my turn isn't over and I can play another card. So let's try this one first, because what I've got here is I've got 2 useless cards that I don't want. So I put those straight into my discard pile, and with this card, and I take 2 new cards. I've got another copper and another copper. I'm up to 3 money, okay? It's okay. And now, because I've still got an action card left, I can play my market card. So my market card lets me draw another card. It's another copper, okay? I'm up to 4 money so far. Things are looking up. I can play another action. I haven't got any more action cards, but that would be nice. I can make another buy. Good, I can now split my money, and I get +1 to spend. So I've now got 5 money, okay? 5 money that I can do 2 different things, or I can buy another big card. Now, I bought a big card last turn. Okay, fair enough. Well, let's see what else I can do this turn. I'm going to get a village. Villages are brilliant. These are fantastic early cards in the game, because they basically let you play another, let you take another card, and they let you play 2 more action cards. Really powerful. So the village is a fantastic, fantastic card. Brilliant for your early game, but also useful throughout the game as well. Right, sorted. So what else? We've got 2 money left. Now, instead of buying a cellar, you might want to buy a moat. Moats are interesting because they're basically a preventative card useful against one other card, which is the militia. This is a 4-point card, and it's a bit of a mean one. Now, Dominion is not necessarily out and out a player versus player game. There are little elements of that throughout the game, depending on which cards you play, but it can be very much a play your own game, which is what some people really enjoy about it. Now, what do the militia do? They're mean. they basically, if you play this on your turn, it means that everyone else, unless they have a moat in their hand, must discard down to 3 cards. So you're automatically making their turns less powerful and helping yourself. So there's various different things that you can basically do in terms of remembering that it's all about the green cards. So buying a estate early on, yes, it's easy, yes, it's fine. Unfortunately, you can dilute your deck very, very easily by buying too many estate cards. So you shouldn't really do that. What's going to be important and a game changer is basically buying the duchies, which you can really get earlier on, not too much of a struggle, but the provinces are where it really, really counts. So the middle part of your game will basically be about building your buying potential, using your mine to basically, as I said, trade up from copper to silver to gold, to basically mean that you're an effective your turn, so you can actually get to 8 money. It won't happen very often. It probably won't, because you'll have all the other cards going on. But in terms of what makes a really great turn, it's when you can go things like, all right, here are my cards. Now what I do is I play this, then I draw that, then I use these 2 cards to play this and buy that and draw this, and I buy that and I trade them for this, and it's this, and that's my turn. That's a really good turn. You don't want to be stuck in kind of like the, well, I've got 3 money, so I buy that, and that's my turn, done. That's not really playing the game to its full potential. Now, you kind of want to have sort of like building a chain and a sequence of events that basically means you're kind of like not only fulfilling your earlier goals, but also helping your later goals as well. And it's all going to be coming back to those green cards. So, depending on the cards that you choose, depending on the deck that you play or any expansion packs, you're going to have a similar experience, but a subtly different experience. So, to find out a little bit more about the cards, let's go to the table view. So, okay, now, as I said, the experience that you have is dictated by the cards in play. So what I want to do is go a quick run through and just show you the different types of ways you can actually use these cards, because they've been designed really, really well, that they all have slightly different effects. Starting at the top, nice and easy, the cellar is basically a swap your useless cards card. The moat is protect you against the militia, but in the meantime, it lets you draw 2 cards, which is good, so it's not exactly going to be a useless card. The workshop lets you basically get a card for free as kind of almost like an additional buy, up to 4, which is basically any of those, or an estate, or a copper, or indeed a silver. Coppers are quite interesting because you can basically buy them for zero actual money, which means you can always have a copper as long as you get an extra buy. But similar question to the estate, the duchy, the province, do you want to be flooding your deck with low value cards? All right, moving on to the smithy. Smithy, nice and easy, get 3 more cards. Militia, basically have 2 more money, or alternatively force the other players to basically reduce their number of cards. Mines are fantastic, as I said, because they basically let you upgrade your money. The original card is discarded and you basically get the next card up. So copper to silver, silver to gold, etc. Market gives you a little bit of everything. So basically an extra card, an extra action, extra buy, and an extra coin. So depending upon how you're going to basically build your deck together, there's lots of different effects to play inside the game. Now remember, this is just the suggested first playthrough. There are lots more cards. So all these different cards give you subtle variations. So for example, if you decided to use a feast, not a feast, let's have a festival. A festival for 5 points instead of a market. So what might that do? Well, this lets you have a card, an action, a buy and a gold. This lets you have 2 actions, a buy and 2 gold. So similar effect in kind of basically a little bit of everything, but a little different focus. So that could be an option. What else might you have? You basically have a chancellor, for example, at 3 points instead of, for example, your workshop. What does a chancellor do? Well, they give you 2 money. In fact, probably more like this. They give you 2 money, which could replace this give you 2 money card. But what it basically means is that you can immediately put your library of cards, your unbuilt deck, into your discard, which means you're shuffling them up. So, for example, if you bought a lot of cards and you haven't got a chance to use them yet, this means that straight away you're starting that process cycling around again, which means it's going to be sooner before your new useful cards can be bought. If you wanted to really explore more of the player versus player options, you could basically put the witch into play. Now, the witch is a 5 card, which basically counts as an attack card, similar to the militia. So you basically maybe want to swap that going on. If you basically have the witch card, you now start putting curses into play. Guess what they do? Yes, they're minus victory points. They're really, really mean. Similar to the militia, they have a basic effect. For example, the Michelin also gives you +2, the Witch also lets you draw +2 cards. Okay, let's imagine you don't want player versus player, you want just for power and glory. Well, you go for the Throne Room then. The Throne Room basically lets you to take another action card and play it twice. So you could basically get 6 more cards, for example, if you play that twice. You could upgrade 2 money at once. You could basically have 2 cards and 4 more actions, which would be ridiculous. You get the idea. So there's a lovely different variety of options here, determining about how you can actually use the cards. It's essentially a card game. So if you think about the different options available, this teaches you a lot about how cards game works. So it could be things like get more cards, shuffle more cards, trade more cards, exchange more cards, upgrade more cards, block certain cards, get extra cards, increase the number, reduce the number. It explores all these different options. And this is just the base game. So there are dozens of different Dominion expansion packs which offer more cards, more effects. So really, for many people, this is where the whole concept of deck building began. And it's a really, really interesting genre of games. There are so many other games of this type available now that basically owe a lot to Dominion. This is kind of the game it started. So most of you may have actually heard of this game before, but you might have never actually played it. So hopefully this will give you a better idea. Now, I feel we're drawing to the end, so let's go back to the final thoughts. So what do we think of Dominion then? Well, it's an absolute classic, and you can see why it became an absolute classic. It did something a bit new, which loads of people have now taken on board and made their own games. So basically what it was offering was certain thing that was very, very valuable. It is a very, very simple game at heart. No, it's not. It's a game that's full of strategy. For people who basically like having sort of simple, I do this, I do that, that's my turn. This is not so much for you. Who basically really enjoys this game are people who can work into the idea of almost like programming. It's the idea of this equals this, so that equals this, so then this equals this, then that can be done to that. That kind of processing idea of what you can do with your turn is where this game really, really thrives. And when you get people who can basically play the same way, you have a wonderful experience. About 80-90% of this game is just playing your own game as well. So for people who don't really enjoy all the player versus player action, this can be a great game to basically feel like you're achieving things each turn without necessarily being struck down by the other players. And this, of course, you're playing the Witch, but enough of that. So the idea is that this is a game where basically you are building the way that your own game works. If you want to be doing this in, let's say, turn 16, 17, you need to be doing this on turn 3 or 4, if possible. There is a certain amount of luck because obviously you're dealing from a deck of cards, but obviously you can kind of edge and control that luck by stacking that deck and building that deck with the cards that you want. Now, there is a difference in terms of short-term playing, long-term playing, medium-term playing, etc. But ultimately you want to choose cards that will give you more options. So for example, earlier on, getting cards that give you more actions like the Village and the Smithy are great because they mean they can start keeping your turn going for a little bit longer. Building more long-term, obviously you want to do things like do the mines, get more gold and silver to increase your buying potential in the second half of the game. Now, it's I mean, in terms of what it really is differentiated by, the artwork's kind of classical and simple. Yes, you've got loads more themed games now that have the same deck building element. Things like Legendary Century Spice Road come to mind, which we're going to be reviewing later. So the idea is that yes, there are other games that do this now. So if you like the idea of this game, but not necessarily the whole medieval feudal setting, there are other games available that give you this kind of experience. But this is for many people where it all actually started from. So a lot of modern day gaming owns a lot to Dominion. So it's definitely worth playing, whether it's at a convention, whether it's at a club. If you feel that you enjoy this kind of like strategy programming game, it might be worth buying just straight off the bat as a good, solid game for the family. Obviously it's enjoyed, but people can think a bit of strategy more. But overall, if you walk past this game, you'd have people having fun. You'd have people sort of like looking at their cards furiously, kind of thinking, strategizing a little bit. Nearly every single turn, you're achieving what you want to do or achieving some of what you want to do. So this is a good thing as well. Yeah, that's about all I need to say, really. So Dominion, definitely a good game. Check it out if you can do. Buy it if you like this kind of theoretical theme strategy game. So, if you want to get in contact with us, as always, you can find us at rogueartistcreations.com. On Facebook, we're at Rogue Artist Creations. Our Twitter handle is at RogueACreations. And you can find me, as always, Andrew Prowse, at GM First. at rogueartistcreations.com. Thank you very much for joining us for the video. Please like, please share, please subscribe, please follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. Do anything you can. We'd love to have your support. Any tips, any advice, any suggestions, let us know, please. All right, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.